Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to enable CRUD operations on the jQuery client grid. CRUD means create, read, update, delete. Whenever you place a grid onto the form and you want to enable the user to update records or delete records or modify them from within your database, you can enable the editing or updating feature in the grid, and it will give you the UI interaction pieces that the developer can now hook events to, and the end user can interact with the grid to make those changes. So what I have in front of me is Visual Studio 2011, and I have an MVC project set up. I'm using Entity Framework as my model, and it's connected to the Northwind database and displaying customer information. So if I run this application now, you'll see that the default MVC template comes up and I have a grid in there, which is a jQuery client grid, and it's showing the customer information that's coming from the Northwind database. If I double click or try to do anything, I'm not getting this edit form or editing capability in the grid. What I want to do is I want to first enable the end user editing, and then I'm going to hook up events and then and handle those events and then persist information to the database. So we go back in my Visual Studio, and first let's enable the UI features. So back in my Visual Studio, I can go to my view and the index view, which is where my grid is at, and here's the razor syntax for the grid, and you see that there's a feature already enabled, which is a group by feature. And the same collection, I can come down and I can say features, and this time I'm going to enable the updating feature. And there are certain options that you can set. So anything regarding updating, you can just continue to change methods and properties to it, and it will just enable those settings for the updating feature. So first thing I want to do is I want to set edit mode to be grid edit mode .row, which means that I want to enable editing on a row by row basis. Then I can say edit add row, enable add row to be true, so the user can add a record. Also delete a record, so I'm going to say enable delete row to be true. And then I also want to set the triggers for that, so I can say start edit triggers, which means when should the row be editing or enabled to be edited. I want to set on a double click, so when the user double clicks on a cell, the entire row should go into edit mode. And finally, I want to set a label for the done button. So you'll see at runtime, you'll see the entire row is going to go into edit mode, and then you'll see a done and a cancel button. So you can modify the text of those buttons. So I'm going to say the done label to be, let's say, submit. And that's all I'm going to set here. And I'm going to run this application again. And now you see the same grid. You have now an extra row up here, which is the add new row, because we have now updating feature enabled. If I double click on any of the cells, you'll see that there is a edit row now enabled on the grid with a submit and a cancel button. We also modified the submit label here. By default, it's going to show you the done label. And now as an end user, I can go ahead and modify the cells, and let's say click submit. And right now it's just a visual indication. You see the font and style change on that row. It's not persistent because we haven't hooked up with any code yet, or we're not handling any events. So it's just a UI persistence. And similarly, I can go ahead and delete a row. It's going to modify that from the UI side. And let's say add a new row, for example. I can just kind of type in some text here and click submit. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, here's my newly added row. If I refresh the page, of course everything's going to be gone because I'm not handling any events. So let me come back in my Visual Studio, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to handle some client events and then hook them up to its controller action that's going to handle all the persistence for me. So for that, I'm going to come to my notepad. I'm going to copy and paste some script here, and I'm going to go through it in a second. So I'm going to copy that. Let me create a script tag here and just paste stuff in there. So what I'm doing here is that I'm grabbing the element of the client grid, which is the ID jQuery update grid, and I'm hooking up a live event. So anytime there's a row is added, or for all the rows, I want to handle the igGrid updating row added event. So anytime a row is added, what I'm doing in that function is I'm just calling the igGrid save changes on that. And similarly, anytime a row is done editing, I'm doing the same thing. I'm calling the same exact option on the grid, which is igGrid save changes. And when a row is deleted, I'm doing the same thing again. So what this does is anytime a client grid is done with, for example, an added or updated or deleted operation, it's going to fire off these events. And in those events, you can do anything you want. Here, you can even do validations before you save changes, so you can prompt user for incorrect values in a row. But here in this case, you're accepting anything that they're entering. We're just going to call save changes directly. One additional thing we will have to do is we have to notify the grid of its update URL or update method that it needs to call, which is basically the action method behind the scenes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my controller, which already has the method, and I'm going to grab its name. Let me just uncomment this code for a second, and we'll look at that too. I'm going to copy this update customer, because this is the controller action that's going to do everything as far as the database persistence goes. So it's going to you'll handle the client events, and when you call save changes, the grid is going to call this update customer method, passing in the transactions that happen on the grid. So you can do both live updates, meaning as soon as the user makes a change, the database gets updated, or you can also do batch updates. So we come back, copy the update customer action method here, and I'm going to say dot update URL, and that's my URL action that I have defined as update customer. So again, as soon as I call save changes, if there are any updates to be sent to the server, it's going to call this action method for me. So lastly, let's come to our controller and go through our action method. So we are getting the transactions that happen on the grid as a JSON array, actually a text array. And what we're doing here is we're using a JSON serializer, which I have found one on the web, and kind of just show you what it looks like. So here's the JSON serializer that I got from JSON.org, and what it's going to help me is to convert that string, the transactions, into a hash table, and then I can iterate through those hash table and grab the values and update my model, entity framework model, and then just call save changes on my model, and it's going to handle the persistence for me. So we got the transactions. I decoded that into an array list of transactions. We grabbed our entity, north with entities. Then in there we have customers. Finally, we just set some. We grabbed the grid model, initialize the grid model, which is holding all of our information, and then we pretty much go through our transactions, which is a hash table. And in there, for example, if it's a type of row, the transaction type of row, it means that it was an update. So what we do here is we grab the first record from our database, and we go ahead and modify that record, making sure that the actual value is not null, and we just update the EF model here. If the transaction type is a new row, which means that a new row was added by the client, we go ahead and create a new customer object, and we grab the values and fill in that customer object, and then we simply add the new customer to the customer collection. And if it's a delete row, meaning a row was removed, we go ahead and find the row within our EF model, and we just call a delete object on that, passing in the delete customer. And once we're done with any of these three transactions, we just call save changes on our model, and pretty much return the page back to our index page. And by doing all of that, everything gets persisted from the grid all the way to the database. So let me run this again. So now you can see that the grid is now hooked up behind the scenes, so you still see all the UI elements that you can use: the add new row, the double click updates, and the delete icon that comes up every time you hover on a row. Now you can go ahead and, let's say, delete a row. So for example, let me delete the second record here. If I hit delete, and what happened, that the UI got updated, it was a deleted record, I just refresh it, it won't come up anymore, because you're persisting everything on live events, meaning any change the user makes, it gets persisted immediately to the database. If I were to go ahead and add a new row, let me add a some company here, a title, sales, for example, contact name John Smith, and a country UK. If I hit submit, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to persist everything back to our database. So if I go ahead and refresh it and scroll, or it's up here already, it's coming directly from the database. And finally, if I were to update a record, for example, this one, and if I just move sales, just have sales in there, and submit. So it got submitted as soon as I moved off of the row, and if I refresh, it's just going to persist that value in there. So you can see that just by hooking up those client events and calling save changes, the grid now fires the update URL action method and passes all the transaction log to that action method. And in that action method, you get the JSON array as string, and you can kind of serialize into different things depending on what kind of serializer you're using for your applications, and then persist those values reading through the array into your database, and build a whole CRUD scenario within your application, the grid. Finally, I just want to show you the database got updated. So if we were to go into our app data in Northwind, actually I have it up here, and do show table data. So you can see that the new record that we added is here. The record that we updated, the contact title for, is also updated here, and the record got deleted is nowhere to be found. So in this quick example, you said it's pretty easy to implement the CRUD scenario in your MVC grids using the Infogesics for jQuery controls in your MVC applications. Thanks for watching.